met at the Westchester Film Festival, and your short film, Pre-Existing Freedom, was screening there, and it went on to win huge awards. I had the honor of sitting next to you during the awards ceremony when it was announced, when it was screened and announced that you won one of the biggest awards there. So it was so fun for me to sit next to you to watch you watching the film and then to be part of you winning. I filmed you and your acceptance speech,
Yeah, and
which
I
was
can't.
amazing.
Yeah, and many people think it is amazing, and it was wonderful to have you there in a really special moment. To be perfectly honest,
Yeah, because you're from Westchester, you grew up there. So
yeah,
we're going to talk about all that. But first, I have many questions for you about this film. So it is documentary and art, it's all of those things. So let's tell people what it is. You started filming during 2020, which was the confluence of the COVID-19 pandemic and the civil unrest that came from the George Floyd murders. You were in Atlanta at the time. So tell me, when did you start filming? At what point did you say, this is a moment in time, I'm going to pick up my camera and start doing something?
April 1st, 2020. I was,
Really?
yeah, it was, I will remember it for um, the rest of my life.
Tell
And
me what happened. What was the moment that you thought, this is what I'm going to do?
I had a cousin who lived in New York. His name was
Hmm.
David Edwards, and he was in his 40s. And everybody at that point had said, "Oh no, only old people get it," and all this other stuff. And then David's in his 40s, and David didn't started to not feel well. And so, my aunt would just deliver food. He lived in Queens, and my aunt would deliver food to his back doorstep. And so the doctor told him to stay by himself. That's what was going on.
Yeah.
My mother would phone me and give me reports on how David was doing. And then just one day she said, David's in the hospital. He felt so bad that he drove himself to the ER and they immediately put him on a ventilator.
Is this who you referenced in the
Yes.
film?
This is the person
Yeah.
that inspired, that just shot me out of a cannon. And then I
Yeah.
in the film that said, I want to do something about this because all of the information was all wrong and people were saying things that weren't true. And this was something that was very serious. And within a week, David was gone, and organ failure and all kinds of other peripheral issues that can come with COVID as well. And then somebody said something to me that really hurt when he passed. Instead of saying, I'm really sorry for your loss, they said to me, well, what were his pre-existing conditions, because that has a lot to do with whether you get
Because
sick.
that's like a blame the victim kind of
Yeah,
thing.
I'm like, what are you talking about?
So you were in Atlanta then, in April. You were in your apartment. That was your apartment that we saw in the film.
Right, because that's when, a lot of social problems had started. And I
Yeah.
sensed it. And I said, I can stay here or leave.
And so you must have had equipment in your apartment, right? Or did you have
Yes,
to? Okay.
I have equipment, and then I had cleared out the apartment. So I had a whole month of just this empty apartment that was on the 14th floor in a high rise, and it got fabulous light. And
Yeah.
it's
Well,
it.
so you decided to film in black and white.
Yes.
So how did you make that decision? Was it something about the black and white unrest that was going on, or did it not have anything to do with that?
It had to do with something that was a little bit more esoteric or aesthetic. The world had become black and white. We saw things in black and white. It was either this or that, yes or no, yay or nay. Like you were either in or out. You believed in the pandemic or you didn't believe in the pandemic. You believed
Hmm.
in, equality and justice for all, or you did not care.
Yeah.
Everything turned extremes. And, one of the things that's very true about color is that color brings everything together and blends everything in sort of this non-binary sort of pattern. Black and white's very stark and it's very binary, you know.
Hmm.
And I really wanted to emphasize that and to take the power of our obsession with blackness and whiteness away. I had to take the color away. where,
Interesting.
yeah, I was
It
sort
was
of,
beautiful the way you did it. Now, you've made other films before, but this the first time that you filmed yourself?
yes, it was.
So it's,
I'm not a self filmer. Um,
but it's so creative and beautiful. And I mean, for me, I saw a couple of things. I saw the sense of isolation,
right.
and then you as a subject matter. I mean, obviously, you have an interesting face, like all of these. How do you direct yourself, or how did you navigate filming yourself?
It was sort of staying outside of myself and staying in the moment and thinking about all the things that were bigger and more important than me. It
Hmm.
was being mindful of my cousin who was now gone. It was being mindful of a lot of other people who were gone. I mean, slowly, like, the guy down the street that sings at the piano bar who's in his 70s, he's gone. I just talked to him a month ago and then he's gone. I mean, you just started to see people and places and things happening all around you where people were just passing away and people were just like arbitrarily dismissing it. That's where I really focused the energy and the feelings. So it had very little to do with me. It was more my disappointment and frustration with the world, and at times, and in particular at that time, our inability to come together, because my assumption is that when tragedy strikes, we all band together. We put down our
Yeah,
differences and our issues, and we say we're going to stand up for each other. And that's what I think being an American is all about. And that's the thing that's always sold me on the idea that this is the greatest country in the world. And I saw that dwindling and going away.
but have you ever acted before?
I have. I have,
Oh, you have. Okay.
probably not in
Because
my own.
your expression in the film is without speaking to the camera necessarily is so expressive and so illustrative of what's going on. But how did you also you're filming it in real time
Yes.
mostly.
Yes.
So you didn't know what was going to happen, right? Did you like storyboard it out? Like how could you really? I mean, things were evolving so quickly.
It was day to day. Sometimes it was hour to hour. That was just when things were just moving and happening in seconds and in windows. And you had to decide, like, okay, this is the day I'm going to jump. Okay, there's a rally downtown. There's the funeral for Richard Brooks. Are you going or not?
So what were you doing? You were walking around with a mask on
And
and
just
just seeing what was going on.
Well, I had an opportunity to shoot really cool images of tall buildings downtown in a major city that normally I wouldn't be able to pull that off. I could just
Yeah.
stand in the street and shoot a huge building, you know?
Now, what about like the John Lewis parts and like the social consciousness parts that you laced in? You merged the two things together. So tell me about putting that into the film and where you chose to place that in the film and how you got that footage.
This is sort of the weird part about the fourth dimensional space that, some of us believe, some of us still working on it a little bit. I had done an interview with John Lewis back in like 2016 where he gave me 25 minutes of his time to just talk about the universe and sort of unpacking it. And everything brought me back to that interview. It was literally like he was telling me what the future would hold.
Wow.
Yeah, and because he was gone
Yeah.
by, and so
So
that
so the footage that's in the film is what you shot of
I
him.
shot that. I'm the only guy that has that footage. That's my footage.
Wow.
And
Wow.
yeah, and so I felt morally obligated to give this man a voice, and it has changed my narrative about the history of civil rights. And I'm going to say something very interesting and profound and slightly controversial as well. As we move forward in history, 100 years from now, 150 years from now, I believe that John Lewis will be considered the greatest civil rights activist of all time. He will supplant these other people that we perceive to be great civil, and they are in their own right, of course. But when we
Well,
started
tell me why. That's a
during
bold statement.
one an
Tell me
enduring
why.
legacy. John Lewis was there for the March on Washington, and John Lewis was there at the beginning and early stages of the rallies during 2020, and John Lewis was there sitting on the floor in Congress at the House to protest some of the decisions that were being made with the administration at that particular time. He fearlessly stood in the face of other people's agendas that didn't have everyone in mind.
Hmm.
And I found that to be extraordinary and admirable on so many levels. And like I said, it changed my perception and my narrative about civil rights. And
Yeah. Well, so this film, Pre-Existing Freedom, it's part of your trilogy, right? So tell
yes,
me about that.
right. So the first film was Pre-Existing Freedom. The second film is called Hope and Story. And oh, sorry, the second film is called Where is America the Beautiful? And that is done. And I can send you that too. And that's like circulated and gone all over the place as well. And now I'm working on Hope and Story, which is the third one. And so I'm combining elements of things that I've shot through documentary films over literally the past 2 decades.
Well, what's
I
the second one about? Can you give me
the
like the log
second
line on it?
Yes, the second one is about a search for who we really are as a culture because since 2020 it's been lost. Where where are we? What are our values? What are the sacred truths that we hold to be self-evident? Do we still
Mhm.
believe that all men and women are created equal? You know, is there justice for all as
Mhm.
well? And so it unpacks more the social discourse post 2020. The insurrection in 2016 and things like that. The massive amount of confusion that we've been in. And that one works again within the form of black and white, and it also works again in the form of sort of, avant-garde filmmaking. And it's one of the other things I feel very strongly about that I think newer platforms for how to tell real stories is essentially important. And for such a long time, it's always been, documentaries or talking heads and it's pictures and everyone like looks like they're Walter Cronkite all the time. No, those days are over. You
Yeah.
know, we
Yeah.
live in a
So what's
far.
the third one? The third one's done and
No, I'm in the
oh,
middle of it. I'm working
okay.
on shooting it. It keeps again, but I've gotten good at this sort of evolving in real time kind of thing. Um,
It's
and
news. You're turning into a journalist.
yeah, I am.
Welcome to the club.
Exactly. So how do you turn news journalism into something that is esoteric and documentary that will captivate an audience from a teenager all the way to someone that is of advanced age?
Right. Because when a lot of times, legacy news networks are boring. And so it is a talking head like me, just sitting there and tonight on the da 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 da, but the way that you shot Pre-Existing Freedom, it just draws you right in.
Right.
And you get all of those context clues for the situation that you were in. And so you were in Atlanta, but people all over the world can relate to that sense of isolation and the masking and the this and all the other things that we experience that time period as a globe, as a global community.
Mhm.
And you captured it perfectly. So if you can do that with other issues, please do.
I want to because what I want to do is turn Pre-Existing Freedom into a continuing documentary series that would be on a streaming platform.
People have very short attention
Absolutely.
spans. Well, but maybe that's not true because we'll watch like 8-part things on streaming
Exactly.
services. But it
Exactly.
has to be interesting. And I think that one of the things you and I talked about is not just giving information, but telling stories.
Sure.
And so you communicating news and information via storytelling because that draws people in. And
Right.
then they'll sit and listen to it. They don't want to be lectured. They don't want to be, you know, feel like a student in a classroom where they're just getting facts all the time. They want to hear a personal story. So I think that's why what you do is so important. And you have another piece called Counter Histories, and that's on Amazon Prime right now, correct?
Correct. Yes.
So tell me about that.
It is about a counter sit-in in 1961. A group of young Black men were inspired by Kennedy's inaugural address. You know, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. They took that very seriously. And what they decided as young college students at that particular time, they were going to do something for their country. And they decided to walk into a diner because in 1961 in South Carolina, it was illegal to be a person of color and walk into a restaurant or a place of business and sit down and order a meal. You could be arrested. And they deliberately walked in there and deliberately got arrested in protest. And then they were assigned 30 days on a chain gang. And they,
Wow.
yeah, like you went to jail for 30 days if you walked in and said, "Hey, can I have a cheeseburger and
Wow.
coffee?" And they started a movement called Jail No Bail. And it was one of the things that really helped to springboard the civil rights movement in the early 1960s with John Lewis and Martin Luther King and Malcolm X and other great Americans like that as well. And so these are sort of unheralded social justice warriors that had a felony on their record for 54 years. So for
Wow.
4 years, they couldn't leave the country, they couldn't vote, even though these gentlemen were Vietnam veterans as well and had risked their lives, you know,
Wow.
in
Now, how
Vietnam.
did this story come to you? Did somebody tell it to you, or you read it, or?
Through PBS. There is a PBS series called The Real South, and they wanted to do a series about counter sit-ins that had happened in the United States from Washington and Baltimore all the way to South Carolina, North Carolina, Nashville, Mississippi, Georgia, all of these places. And I chose the South Carolina story in Rock Hill because
Mhm.
to me, that one hit me the best because these 9 young men were of color and they were also college people. These were decent individuals. These were educated individuals that were going through the boundaries of the law to change the laws as
Hmm.
well. So
It's
there's
so interesting if you think about what we witnessed in 2020, 2021, after George Floyd's murder with the rioting that happened in so many cities. And I'm not sure what the rioting, the protesting, I'm all
Mhm.
for. The rioting and looting, absolutely not. Of course, nobody is. And yet you think about the sit-ins and the counter protests from the 1960s or earlier, perhaps, that were quiet and
Right,
yet so groundbreaking.
exactly. And
And
effective.
yeah, and acts of civil disobedience that are so memorable because they were just asking to be treated the way that white people were treated, just to, as you're saying, to go have lunch at a lunch counter. Um, it's fantastic. It's a
Right.
fantastic subject matter.
Yeah. And so many people are still alive who remember. You know,
Yeah,
my father was born and raised in the South, and he is still alive, and he can tell stories about like places he could not enter from the front. He had to go to the back, and he had to sit in the
mm,
balcony. And as a little kid, we'd eventually, we'd moved to Philly, and I remember like he hated drive-throughs. He's like, "We're going in. We're going in. We're going in. We're not going
because you
through a
could,
drive-through."
right?
Yeah, I mean, for him, there was a certain level of integrity that was associated with walking into a McDonald's and walking up
Yeah,
to the cash register and saying, "I'd like to order a meal," versus just getting it in your car and never coming in. He's like, "We don't do that. We don't do that
yeah,
as a family. We
yeah.
walk into a restaurant and we sit down and we will be respected and we will be served."
Absolutely. I want to ask you about After the Fall, which is about HIV. So tell me about that. And you filmed it in Romania.
Yes.
So tell me how the premise came to you and then what it was like to film in Romania.
There's an organization called World Vision who assists people at risk all over the world and there was a group of young people that were at risk because they were victims of institutionalized HIV. And institutionalized HIV is you go to a hospital, they have to draw blood or they have to give you an injection. Your assumption as a patient is that all needles are clean at all times. Now, in post-communist Romania in the early 1990s, the healthcare system fell apart. So there was no money
Mm.
anymore. So people started reusing needles. And so it started spreading disease and specific to HIV. So a lot of women had children who were HIV positive. And then they also had a lot of military people that were moving in and out of the Black Sea area. And they would have relationships or clandestine affairs with, people that were, sex workers, and that spread and gestated the disease even more. And then these particular military personnel would come into the hospitals and donate blood, and would be tainted in bad blood, but they didn't have the facilities in place to be able to test it to know, and so they were giving it to children, and the food supply was dwindling, and so they were giving babies nutritional injections to keep them alive, and again spreading the disease. So you had a whole generation of young people who were HIV positive, even though it wasn't behavioral HIV, but they were treated the same way as you shouldn't treat anybody bad with HIV, number one. But, there was no distinction whatsoever with anybody that had HIV. You were just a leper, you were just a pariah, and they were kicked out. Families were deserting these children. These children were put into group homes and into these places where foster care, basically. And so they
Mhm.
all kind of grew up together from the early 90s. And so by the time I came around to do the film, they were all coming of age. These were all late teens, early 20 somethings, and they wanted to live real lives. So they wanted to be able to move into society, but society was pushing them away. Like, you can't get a job, you can't come over here. We're going through the counter thing again. This time it's just HIV and it's in
So
Eastern
it's another group of people who are being discriminated against. Is
discriminated against. And
that what it appealed
ultimately,
to you about
yeah,
it?
exactly. It was, I'm very sensitive about people being discriminated against. And so that was sort of the point of entry for me, and what made me passionate about the project. And some of these people wanted to live as HIV with only other HIV people. Some of them wanted to live HIV and be around HIV negative people. And then some people were HIV positive and they didn't even want to tell anybody about it either. There was these three levels of this. And in all instances, very, very highly charged and politicized and very complex. And, many of these people wanted to marry, start families, go to school, get educated like anybody else. And so that was the story we were following. And it was very challenging because in Romania, you have people that are of Russian descent, and then you also have people that are of Mediterranean descent. And then
Mhm.
again, discrimination, there are these cultural conflicts.
Hmm.
As much as, we know discrimination in America is, oh, it's a black-white thing. You go to these other places and it's this like Russian Mediterranean thing.
Well, I said when right before the Westchester Film Festival, I'd been in Spain. And so yeah, I was very jet lagged when I met you. But I did not know of all of the conflicts, the regional ethnic conflicts in Spain. And I guess wherever you go in the world, there's going to be people who hate other people
Exactly.
and discriminate against them for their language or their skin color or whatever it is. But so you've worked all around the world and traveled all around the world, but you're from Westchester, right?
Which is quite an anomaly. And I realize that sometimes when I come back, because, Westchester's a place where a lot of people are born, they're raised, and they live there most of their lives, and they're very
Right.
happy doing that. And I have,
Well, what was it like? I mean, so you went to Temple University and then you got your master's at Georgia State.
yes,
So you knew you wanted to be a filmmaker, right?
very, very early. My first film was made in Westchester. My first few films, like old Super 8 and 16 millimeter films. I should go dig them up. I could do a
Yeah.
symposium
What
about
was
the
the
early
subject
days
matter?
of.
Do you remember?
it's so 'cause, the first one was about gender equity, and it's about a guy who's got a really fast hot rod car, and he street races this other old beat up Chevy Nova, and at the end of the race, the Chevy Nova wins. And then the guy gets frustrated and drives off, and then we reveal that the person driving the old beat up Chevy Nova was female.
Oh,
But
I like that.
this tough guy gets beaten
I
by
had a Chevy Nova when I was in high
exactly, yeah,
school.
and I did too. So,
They
exactly,
were loud. They were loud, big boats, but I
exactly.
liked mine.
Me too. I liked mine too, but you could always find one to buy out there on Westchester Pike.
Right.
And
That's when you started. And so what about your social consciousness? Did you know that the kind of films that you wanted to do would have that background?
not immediately. I just was sort of going for what I knew or what meant something to me.
Well, where did that come from? It sounds like your father kind of
My
implanted
father,
that, and maybe
my
your mom
mother,
too.
yeah, my father taught at Cheney University, was the band director there. My mother worked at the Chester County Health Department as well. And my mother went on to get a master's degree from the University of Pennsylvania in public health, as well. My mother integrated the aerobics classes at the YMCA in Westchester in the late
Wow.
70s, early 80s, because she loved Jane Fonda workout aerobics. And so she wanted to go over there and she was going to do aerobics. And she brought all of her girlfriends with her. And they're like, we're going to be in these aerobics classes too. And it was like a big deal, but she integrated that.
Listen, everybody should have access to Jane Fonda.
Hey, I'm with you on that. Absolutely.
But Westchester, and I mean, I hope you agree with me that it was a great weekend, the Westchester Film Festival. It was great to see all of those filmmakers in that space and have so many creative people there. It's great for the town. And you talked a bit about the evolution of Westchester,
Right.
that it was not a Renaissance place when you were growing up, but
Right.
you feel like it's emerging, right?
Without question. It's emerging and it's going to emerge and it's going to be something incredible and something wonderful. People just have to get comfortable with it and get used to it. This is what
Yeah.
it's going to be global, it's going to be diverse, and dare I say it, it's going to become a little bit more international as well. And I would argue that it already has, but we're going,
Yeah.
you
I
know,
think the culture part of it, the restaurants and
Sure,
the art
absolutely.
galleries and all of these things. And I was just there last weekend. They shut down Gay Street for outdoor dining in the warm weather, and it feels like a warm and welcoming kind
Mhm.
of a place. So what's next for you? So you're showing the film. Are you showing Pre-Existing Freedom at the Beverly Hills Film Festival or
No,
something else?
something else. It's a screenplay. I wrote a screenplay called All Good, which is about the corrupt nature of high school football. And
Ooh.
exactly. So the beat goes on. And then I have a web series that's screening at the Miami Web Fest right now. It's called Trump's Children, and it was shot in Westchester in 2016 at the famous Trump rally that was on the campus of Westchester University. When, it was supposed to be like 5,000 people show up to a Trump rally and 30,000 people showed up. And I fortunately was there to be able to film it. And I interviewed young people from high school and college and their thoughts and feelings about Donald Trump. And what it did was give us a window into where we are now. That particular piece now is very socially relevant. And those kids from Westchester that were going to school in college and high school in 2016 were saying things that are now relevant to us as points of conversation in 2024.
Wow. So that's a
Yeah,
web series. Where can people see it?
they can go to my streaming page, which is tomorrowpictures.tv, or they can also go on to YouTube and watch it on my channel, YouTube channel, which is also tomorrowpictures.tv, or they can just Google me at Frederick, Fr3der1ck as well, and you'll get everything. Everything will come up. But anyone from Westchester and the Delaware Valley should go watch. It's a 21 episode web series. Each episode's about 3.5 minutes. It's bingeable, but you can send it out to friends and watch it. And I encourage people to post it as well, because it's young people talking about the world that we live in right now. And I think
Yeah.
that's really important. And so it's without bias. It's just listening to kids talk, and you get to hear kids who have had the opportunity to make up their mind for themselves. And then you are also listening to kids who are sort of parroting what their parents tell them or what their parents say. So how we raise our kids is a very important issue of today, because we are setting leaders into the future and for tomorrow as well. And so the web series is sort of a cautionary tale.
Well, I'll be interested. I will definitely go watch it. I can't wait to see it. And I think, just to be journalistically fair, that there are probably very many kids who are parents whose parents are Democrats, who also, they parrot their parents'
Mhm.
speech, and probably do all sorts of things. And it'll be interesting to watch this generation, and how they evolve with their being digital natives, and how they interact with politics, and all of this sorts of stuff. So that sounds like a fascinating thing, and a moment in time that you captured again, as is your mission, and that's what you're doing. And I'm so glad that you're doing it.
Thank you.
So thank you so much for making the time today. I loved Pre-Existing Freedom. And I can't wait to watch your other things. So we're going to put all the links to everything so that everybody in our community can watch it too. And I know that you're in Beverly Hills, but I hope that we can get together when you come back here.
This has been a pleasure. Thank you. And I look forward to seeing you soon.